Happy 2021. Wishing you all health in this new year. My name is Amelia Glaser. I am the director of the Jewish Studies program and a professor of Russian and comparative literature. If you hear any excitement in the background, it's just my family. I'm really, really pleased to welcome Rabbi Philip Graubart to UC San Diego this evening. Rabbi Graubart has worn many hats in this forum, in this UCSD Jewish Studies Forum in the past. He has served as the chief rabbi at Bethel Synagogue in La Jolla, a position that I believe was named in his honor when he retired a few years ago from that particular job. Before that, he had held rabbinical posts in New York City and Massachusetts. He's also held leadership positions at the Shalom Hartman Institute, earlier at the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, and currently at San Diego Jewish Academy. Rabbi Graubart also served as the president of the Jewish Studies Program's Community Council, formerly the Board of Visitors, and currently remains on the executive committee of this group as its past president. But this evening, he joins us in his role as a novelist. His most recent novel, Women and God, was just published by Olympia Press in November 2020. I will hold up my copy for you, my now well-read copy. His last novel, Silwan, was a murder mystery novel that actually weaves into itself struggles in Israel-Palestine. His other books include My Mother's Song, Planet of the Jews, A Suicide Note, A Murder, A Rabbi's Obsession with Death, Loss, and Renewal, and My Dinner with Michael Jackson, and other stories. So I'm really excited to be talking with Rabbi Graubart about his novel. Now, I believe, is a time to be thinking about the importance of literature. Among other things, we're reminded of the complex and beautiful world that is the human life and psyche, especially when we read this kind of novel that weaves together plot and spirituality, spiritual struggles. So I wanted to just say a couple of words by way of introduction as someone who's just recently read this hot off the press book. The book at its core explores a fine line between spirituality and unwanted intimacy. And there's a main character, without giving anything away about the novel, there's a main character, Moishe, who echoes of these larger than life figures in the Jewish world, especially Shlomo Carlebach. And then you also have this main character, the lead protagonist, a much younger female rabbi who is tasked with unraveling accusations against this main character. So Phil, I wonder if in introduction, you could say a few things about what led you to write the book, and then maybe share with us a passage to get us to get it in our ear, and we can go on from there. We talked about maybe a longer passage to begin with, and we can intermix some weaving, some readings and some questions.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here, and there's some family members here too. I'm really thrilled to see, and some colleagues. So it's very
I have nice. Family members here too. So
well, maybe it's your family and my family, and that's
like a family reunion.
Yeah. So why did I write this book? Gosh, that's a hard question. I had an idea, and I thought, well, I guess you sort of located the central dilemma in the book is that there's this young woman rabbi who is chosen by the ethics committee of her rabbinical organization to investigate a mentor, or someone that was very, very important to her. I mean, in the book, it goes back to when she was 13 years old and at a camp, and then through rabbinical school, and then through her career. So it's a very important figure. And so she's charged with investigating these complaints against him, these accusations, sexual misconduct. And so she has to pay a cost personally for that. But it kind of raises the question of, and maybe this is one of the central dilemmas of the book, is what do you do with a spiritual mentor, someone who was really important for you, anybody, in their spiritual growth, in their career, or any kind of mentor, and is suddenly accused of, and is probably guilty of some kind of sexual misconduct. And so that's a very, it's actually, in some ways, it's contemporary. I mean, you certainly, and when I was first writing the book, I was telling people, this is my Me Too novel. Although even when I would say that, I didn't like it because it's not like I'm glomming onto some contemporary issue that I think needs to be explored in fiction. It really is a timeless dilemma. I mean, what do you do with a teacher that suddenly doesn't meet your expectations? Any kind of mentor. What do you do with a parent, who suddenly you find out terrible things, although that person is a huge influence in your life? And I guess I wanted to explore that, among other things. I wanted to explore that. You and I, Amelia, we talked about too this thin line between heightened charismatic spirituality, spiritual leaders, and misconduct. And it's not just, obviously, not just Judaism. I mean, the Catholic Church has been dealing with this for a very long time. And you think of yoga leaders. I mean, it's a common dilemma. I'd say a problem. Spiritual leaders who misbehave. Something in their heightened spirituality causes them to misbehave. I don't know. But I was sort of interested in that too. And then, then I had the story, and the story took on its own momentum and characters. I grew to like the characters, and then, I had a book.
So I wonder if you could share a passage with us now.
Yeah. So this is the longer one you were thinking, is that? And then we'll do this.
We may as well. Yeah. Let's start with the longer passage, and then we can jump into some more questions.
All right. So I also want to say it was a little hard for me to pick out a passage to share because they're all so great. No, I don't mean that, because it's a book of surprises. It's a suspense novel, like my previous one, Silwan, and I like suspense novels, so I don't want to give anything away because I'm suspecting that maybe some of you haven't read it yet. So I wanted to pick something that wouldn't give away anything or give away much, and in the book itself. So you have that sort of frame plot of this investigation of whether this guy committed these acts. There's also some flashbacks, a kind of inner narrative of where the young woman, Rabbi Yael, her name is Yael, and where she first met Moshe. Moshe is the charismatic figure in her life at a camp called Camp Tikva, or Tikva, which a camp I just made up, but it has some similarities to another camp, which some of you may recognize. And I'm going to read from some of those. They're flashbacks that appear in the novel, just to add some depth to the relationship between Yael and Moshe. So one is a whole chapter that's not a long chapter, and I'm going to read that. It's mostly dialogue, so I'm going to be doing both parts. And as I read it, I may have to kind of bring my own voice in to tell you what's happening, because it's mostly just dialogue, one after another. So hopefully you'll get it. All right, go ahead. So Camp Tikva, 1995, and this is happening during. So there's a camp word called Otzer, which I think I explained in the book. Otzer is a Hebrew word that means curfew, but at camp it didn't mean curfew. When I went to camp, it meant there was a time right before lights out. Like, I don't even remember, like 45 minutes, something like that, right before, and it was free time before the campers had to go to sleep. And I'm talking about campers here that are 13, 14. And it was this weird sort of twilight moment of the day in camp where you could do whatever you want. And it was often pretty late, because this is Wisconsin, takes place in Wisconsin, where in the summer, it stays light pretty late. And so bedtime, I don't know, just in my mind, was kind of later. And I don't want to say you could do whatever you want, but there seemed to be less supervision. And, the camp was sort of turned over to the campers for like this 45 minutes. So, I mean, and we're talking about 13, 14-year-olds. I mean, most were throwing a ball around or wrestling or screaming at each other. But there were kids that would be making out. I mean, you find a tree. It was just a weird, beautiful time at camp. So this is happening during Otzer. And Yael, who was 13 at the time, is talking to Moshe. And it's sort of towards the end of that summer camp. Okay, this is Yael talking. Okay, but what happens when we die? When we die, my favorite subject, a story? Why does everything have to be a story or a song? Can't you just tell me? I tell you with stories or with songs. You think I'm a philosopher? I'm here to teach you the truth? That my job is to instruct you on what happens in reality? Please. Stories is what I do. To be honest, it's the only thing I'm really good at. Okay, I forgot to say something, especially because my family's there. There's profanity in this book. I also have some former congregants. So, you know, and this is much to the disgust of my wife, who doesn't like it when I do this in my books. But you know what? What I tell her is people use these words sometimes, and especially under stress. And Yael is 13 and she's experimenting with all sorts of different parts of her life. So this is Yael talking. So he said that he's going to tell her story. She says, "Okay, another fucking story. Yael, please. This potty mouth, where did you get this from? Me? When did this start? Sorry, another friggin' story, okay? Yes, okay. Now, this isn't even my story. It's from the Gemara. Everybody knows. A holy tzaddik has an argument with his wife. Knew what happens all the time, believe me. The man gives too much to charity. His wife feels anxious about their future. They're not, God bless them, young. It's important to support our holy beggars, but Nebuch, not if it makes you poor. So she snaps, they argue, and then he does the natural thing, what you and I would do. He runs off to sleep in the cemetery. The natural thing? No, they don't have a couch or a spare bedroom. Besides, haven't you ever slept in a Jewish cemetery? I recommend it. So peaceful. Anyway, he sleeps. Such a sleep you get when you're with the dead. The sleep of the dead. Gewalt, like he's never slept before. But suddenly, the middle of the night, voices. 2 voices, a lady. Maybe his wife looking for him? Enough with the arguments? No, too melodious. Frankly, much younger than his wife. And the other, a child. Or maybe really a tween. I mean a teen, your age. Sounds like you, in fact. Me? It was me? Sounds like you, but not you. Now, our holy tzaddik looks around. It's pitch black. But maybe he can catch a glimpse. But deep down, he knows. He knew even before he heard the voice. When he heard the voice inside the voice. Everyone knows this voice, the one inside. He knew these voices did not come from the land of the living. They are voices from the better world, spirit voices. 2 dead people. One says to the other, "Come, child, explore with me the world on the other side of the curtain. We'll tour through all the disasters that afflict that world of misery." The other side of the curtain? What curtain? It's like an iron curtain? No, a curtain. Probably not iron. Velvet. We'll say velvet. It separates us from them, the living from the dead. The older spook urges the child, "Fly with me. Such disasters we'll see." But the child answers, "I can't go. You see, my burial shroud, so unfortunate, it's incorrect. My parents, they didn't follow the sacred procedures handed down from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. They buried me improperly. But no, you go, and you come back, and you tell me what's going on there, behind the curtain, the disasters." 2 seconds go by. No longer. The man has been holding his breath this whole time, so he quickly exhales. He hears the child speak. "You're back," she says, "so soon." The grown-up answers, "Child, it's been 500 years. Time is so complicated, but never mind. Let me tell you what I saw on the other side. Wars, famine, extinctions, global warming, interest rates, the Electoral College, impeachment. Such fun I had. So sad you couldn't go with me. I will tell you everything in our own spirit language, so it doesn't take 500 years. But first, one secret I'll divulge, right here in human language, because it's about this land, this country where our bodies rest and our souls wander. So interesting. News for the farmers. Too bad we can't tell them. A strange blight will afflict this province, but only during the second planting. Whoever plants everything during the first quarter and avoids the second altogether will make a fortune. A fortune. Ah, mortal, she said, so stuck, so trapped by soil and bugs, by rainstorms, by appetites, by needs, by their physical bodies, so trapped. Did I tell you, sweet Yael, our holy friend is a farmer? No, in his village, everyone is a farmer. Every schlepper breaks the bones on his back, planting and sowing, digging their fingers through the dirt, eking out some miserable bounty from the land. Nebuch, he's not a particularly skilled farmer, barely gets by, fights with his wife over money, as we saw. But now new, inside information, insider trading. What does he have to lose? Well, everything, but as we see, when it comes to financial decisions, this is no genius. He takes all his seeds, borrows 10 times more, risking his home, all his worldly possessions, including the silver Hanukkah menorah his holy mother-in-law gave them as a wedding gift, plants everything the first quarter. Not so much grows, to tell you the truth. It's the first quarter, and his farming skills, not so good. Still, he gets something, enough. And then second quarter, a mysterious blight. Never been anything like it. The whole village, the whole province is wiped out except for our holy, sainted, righteous, cute schlepper farmer. The only one with produce. He sells it all. Bada ba boom. He's a millionaire. That's a great story. You answered all my questions. Thanks so much. That's not the end. Stop yawning. It's rude. Your sarcasm. You should maybe, well, never mind. I'll continue. A year goes by. The man goes to sleep in the cemetery. Again. Another fight with his wife? Ah, now that's a good question, a point of law. You see, child, our sacred rabbis instruct us that it's not permitted to seek out the dead. But the Holy Gemara tells us that this man is a tzaddik. He's righteous. A righteous man knew he wouldn't violate the law. So he must have some other reason to sleep again in the cemetery. Must be another argument. This is Rashi. On the other hand, the Tosfos say, never mind. Forget my questions. What happened that night in the cemetery? Same thing. Middle of the night, during a death-like sleep, he wakes up. Two voices, young, old. Let's go explore behind the curtain. Nebuch, she can't. Improperly buried. So the other goes, disasters, droughts, starvation, genocide, nuclear holocaust, fun stuff, and also inside information, farming tips. Naturally, everybody knows, the man plants at the right time, different from the rest of the world. Now, he's not just a millionaire, poor schlepper, mediocre farmer. Suddenly, he's the richest man in the province. Why are you telling me this? You asked me. I asked you what happens when we die. You told me a ghost story. Not even a ghost story. Ghost stories are supposed to be scary. This one is weird. Weird, really. Well, I guess it's sort of fun. Child, why ask me about death? Well, that's obvious because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of dying. I haven't told anyone. I think I might be dying right now. Feel right here on my head. Feel this lump. It's nothing. There, I felt it. Ah, it's your skull. I'm promising you it's nothing. You're not dying. Okay, but one day I will. I'll drown. I'll drown in the lake. No swimming, still afraid. But the story. In the story, what's it like to be dead? I don't know. I guess it's fun. It's fun to be dead? No, you should live a long life. I bless you. You will. But afterwards, maybe not so bad. Remember, it's not my story. It's the Holy Gemara after all. But let me tell you a short one. Don't worry, the shortest. The Holy Rabbi Jacob lays dying. His friend, the saintly Rabbi Isaac, goes to visit him. A mitzvah, visit the sick. Say goodbye. They make a deal. Rabbi Isaac says, my holiest teacher, after you die, visit me. Come to me from the other world, to this one. From the other side of the curtain? Exactly. So he does. He dies. He visits. The dead visit to the living. In a dream, maybe. Who knows? I only tell stories. I don't say what happened. No, he visits. Rabbi Isaac says, holy teacher, what was it like? What was it like to die? He answers, dying? Dying? It was nothing. Easiest thing in the world. Like taking a thread from a glass of milk. I don't understand the metaphor. Tell you the truth, sweet Yael, I don't either. Let's just say it means it was easy. Nothing to be afraid of. Nothing to lay awake at night, fearing, contemplating, worrying about. A thread from milk. Could anything be less frightening? Anyway, it goes on. Dying, he says, nothing to fear. In fact, if God offered to send me back as alive as you, Brother Isaac, I'd say no. And you want to know why? Because the fear of death, it drives us all crazy. The fear of death. So it's better to be dead? No, sweet one, I don't think that's the lesson. I think you're just being a smart-ass teenager. New? I know. The lesson is to stop being afraid. But how? Sweet one, my most holy, darling child, what are you not telling me? What are you talking about? You think I'm keeping secrets? I'm 13 years old. I'm always by myself. What kind of deep secrets could I have? Exactly, you're 13 years old, afraid of dying? My precious one, everyone knows. Even a 13-year-old knows, especially a 13-year-old knows. You're not dying anytime soon. So fear, your fear, where's it coming from? What are you afraid of? What was I afraid of? All right, now Yael is narrating, so she's talking now. This was the conversation, I was sure. We were talking about death, but somehow we changed the subject, or I changed the subject. What was I afraid of? My parents, my dad, his job. And I was in the newspaper. We're going to move, My mom and I know, child, divorce, it's a curse on a child. And your father, well, what can I say? We all have weaknesses. I'm certainly not one to judge. But fear, somehow I understand. Compassion, anxiety, maybe a close relative of fear. You're afraid your father won't make a living? He won't be able to support you? I tell you now, with every ounce of certainty in my soul, that your father will make a fine living. How do I know? It's just how these things work. New men get away with this nonsense. Everybody knows. You don't have to be afraid for him or for yourself. Food will be on your plate. Clothing you'll have. You'll attend Harvard University if you get in. Money will be there. No, that's not it. Crickets chirped. Boys bashed each other on the soccer field. Mosquitoes dive bombed, stabbed and sucked blood. Girls gossiped and giggled. Wisconsin summers. That summer. Oats there. Twilight almost over. The night coming fast. I fell apart. I soaked my shirt with tears. Moisture wrapped me in his thick, hairy arms, held me tight, gently patted my back, comforted me. It felt like love. I swear to God, love. I swear to fucking God, he did it like a grandfather, nothing else. He was a goddamn loving grandfather, which is what I needed. Then what is it? What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of being alone. Ah, child, my lovely one, holy sister, that is something to fear. But look, here we are now, Nu, you and I, we're not alone.
Thank you. I'm so glad you read this passage because I feel like it illustrates really well a couple of things that you're doing in this novel. First of all, just the stories within stories. You have as this main character, the Moishe character, a storyteller, somebody who can't talk without telling, spinning this long yarn. And he does this as a rhetorical device as a rabbi, but he's also doing it because it sort of kind of takes over his mind. He has all these stories that are weaving together about other people and about the past. And I'm wondering if you could say something about stories and how you craft them, because of course you craft different kinds of stories too. You write in different genres, but also, as I've heard you tell stories as a rabbi, and also, read your fiction. And what are the similarities? What are the differences? If you could talk a bit about this.
Sure, that's interesting. Yeah, well, first of all, I'll talk about stories just in general and my affinity to stories. It's interesting that I have a lovely regular conversation with some fellow retired rabbis. Some of them are here. We were just talking about Jewish philosophy and Jewish theology, and I teach a course at the San Diego Jewish Academy on modern Jewish thought, Jewish philosophy, and the irony behind me having these discussions is that. I don't really get philosophy. Like I'm totally unqualified to be teaching a course in Jewish philosophy or to discuss it. It was just, at rabbinical school that it was just like that stuff would fly by me. I really resonate with stories. So I like to tell people that Judaism doesn't really do philosophy or theology. Judaism does stories. And then, we have to figure out what the philosophy, the theology is in. Now I tell people that maybe that's just because I resonate more with stories than I do with abstract philosophy. But I think that's certainly true in the Talmud. I mean, the Talmud is not a philosophical tract in any ways. It's a book of laws, but it's a book of little tales, of stories, and there's profound meaning. The little story I read in that chapter about the guy that sleeps in the cemetery is actually from the Talmud. Moshe embellishes it a bit, but it's in the Talmud. There are three types of stories that Moshe tells in the novel. One are stories that are from the Talmud. One are Hasidic stories that I've read here and there. And third are I just made up some stories for him to tell, and then pretended that they were famous Hasidic stories, but just stories that I liked. I just my whole rabbinate before I left the pulpit was really about telling stories. It was a very big philosophy of mine and how you build community by telling. We tell stories to each other, true stories that we'd like to be true. And I don't know that I totally got that across. I mean, there's so much to do as a synagogue rabbi, but it was certainly something I tried to do. Was to let's share stories together. Let's tell each other stories. We'll get to know each other through the stories. We'll understand our deepest aspirations through stories. And then I think it was a natural leap for me to write fiction. Writing fiction is an interesting challenge for anybody, but I mean, particularly for a rabbi. And just in terms of a market, it's easier to get published if you're not writing fiction. You write some other kind of Jewish self-help book, and it's easier to get noticed. But I just never had an affinity towards that. So for me, it was just novel after novel after novel, or collection of stories, and that's where I was going to go. And then I had to somehow incorporate that into a rabbinic career. That also, was a little awkward.
So another thing I just wanted to open up, a question I wanted to open up, and I think we'll talk for another 10, 15 minutes, including maybe another short passage, and then we'll open up to others who want to ask questions. But one of my favorite parts of this novel is the way that prayer figures in, the discussion of prayer. You have this protagonist, Yael, who's taught to pray without expecting anything in return. And this is really difficult. And it continues to challenge her as an adult, right? She's, there are these questions that bother her throughout her life, right? What if prayer doesn't work? How to choose between the soul and the mind when she's sort of choosing her partner? What if the teacher who has played God in various ways throughout her career is a total fraud? These questions of faith that keep coming back. And without giving too much away about your novel, she keeps returning to this idea that prayer and maybe faith is an aesthetic phenomenon. And I don't know if this is a kind of a Hasidic concept, or if we should think about this more broadly, but I wonder if you could say more about this, and maybe more about the role that a figure like Carlebach plays in American Judaism to your mind. How can we, and I guess it's a version of the question of, can we separate aesthetics from ethics? Because that's part of what's going on here with this Moshe character. He's in many ways a deeply unethical character, but a beautiful aesthetic character who brings other people to their own ethical conclusions. So what do we do with that aesthetic, with the music, with the beauty?
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot there. Just trying to think of where to start. I mean, I guess I want to start a bit with Yael, and kind of who she is as a person and a rabbi. And I'm going to bring something and then just put it aside. I mean, there's this challenge of, an older guy like me, writing in the voice of a young woman rabbi. And this is the second, you don't have to have read the earlier book. This is the second book I've had where Yael was the main character. So this is the second in the Yael series, although no one calls it that except me. But so it's the second time I've written in the voice of a young woman rabbi, and I was nervous about that even like 6 years ago when I was writing the first book, and just I had artistic worries, like can I pull that off, and also just some kind of identity issues. Is this even proper for me to try? But anyhow, you go where the muse kind of takes you. But so Yael has very little in common with me, just demographically, right? I mean, she's a young woman rabbi, coming of age spiritually in the 90s, and she's a millennial, really, or just a little bit older, and I'm much older. But I guess one thing we have in common is she starts her rabbinic studies and her kind of rabbinic career coming at it from the intellect, even though she understands there's a depth to this world that needs to be understood. So she's reading, Kierkegaard at 13 and Heschel, and she wants to read deep ideas, but because she wants to understand them. So the spiritual life for her, the Jewish spiritual life, is about engaging the intellect. And what Moshe gives her is it kind of opens her heart to this whole other world. Like, you identify it as the aesthetic, the poetic, we could call it the mystical. And she's just blown away by that. At first it's really disturbing to her. And she encounters it again in rabbinical school when she meets Moshe again after 10 years, and she's still struggling with it all through her career, but it gets into her heart.
We're having you break up just a little bit.
Sorry, I don't know.
You're back. We seem okay now.
Yeah. Do I have to start all over from the very beginning now
I
and
know,
read the
it was
passage
just
again?
like 5 seconds ago. Yeah, we're good.
All right. Yeah. So she, I think what she ends up doing is as a synagogue rabbi, she successfully integrates the intellect with the aesthetic, the intuitive, the mystical, the deeply spiritual. And so I'm saying all this because that's also a journey I took. I think I thought about studying Judaism seriously also from that age, like 13 or 14. Rabbinical school for me was a place to study Talmud, in Jewish thought and integrate those into an intellectual framework. And it really took me a while in my first congregation in Northampton. There's a few people here from there too. This is really a reunion of sorts. But I had to really quickly realize, oh, there's more to there's, even though that was actually an extremely intellectual congregation. So in some ways it was a good fit, but I had to realize pretty quickly that there was more to the Jewish religious life than just explaining the intellectual depth of the Talmud. And I'll say this, this is a friendly group. It really had a lot to do with Shlomo Carlebach. Shlomo Carlebach came to Northampton and gave a concert. I sort of knew him. My dad had some records, where there was this, and he would play them around the house. But he spent a Shabbat with us and spent a lot of time with me. Very generous with his time. And it made a big difference. And he told me what I should be reading. And, I don't know how deeply to go into this. So some of you, when you're reading the book, may think the Moshe character is based on Shlomo Carlebach. Boy, I hope you don't do that. No, obviously there are elements of Shlomo in the character. It's not only Shlomo. I said before, there are many spiritual leaders who are deeply effective as spiritual leaders who turn out to be deeply problematic human beings. And I'll say without hesitation, Shlomo was one of those people, but very important to me. And I to this day, he's influences me. So I think that, as you talk about the nexus between the intellect and the spirit that characters like Shlomo embody are really important. But then you end up with this great dilemma. So what do we do with their deep imperfections? And can their teaching survive what we ultimately find out about their persons? One other point, because this is true with Moshe and also true with Shlomo, is that music is very important. Just music as a pure spiritual aesthetic experience. The character in the book writes beautiful melodies. It's part of his appeal. He actually becomes famous in a way that more famous than Shlomo ever became. In the book, he's a fictional character. And it's his music and his storytelling, but the music is very, very important. And it's the music that enables him to get through to people. And it also took me a while to realize how important music is as a rabbi. And not just as a rabbi, I mean, it just in general, as a spiritual tool, how important it could be. Good music, how awful bad music can be. So it's there, that connection. And I guess I do try to draw it out in that character.
Well, what I think comes through really beautifully in the description of the circle that gathers around Moshe and around his music, and especially his music, but also his stories, is that even though we come to question Moshe, good things happen from the music. You have these, human connections are made. You have individuals delving into their soul and coming to grips with, their traumatic childhoods. So there are these positive experiences that emerge for them. And I feel like you managed to tell that story really beautifully.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That was a tough balance. And I'm still not sure I got it right. And when I was talking to people about, oh, this is my Me Too novel, in jest and regretting it as soon as I said it. But there is this dilemma. It's a dilemma that plays itself out now in cancel culture, which when I started writing the book, I hadn't even heard of, but we've all heard of it now. And who do you cancel, and how much of that person do you cancel, and especially if that person really is deep in your heart. I mean, what if that person is a parent? What if that person is the most important doctor you've ever dealt with and saved your life. And so those to me, those are the human dramas that emerge from the Me Too movement, from cancel culture, that in some ways I don't think are addressed quite enough in our culture. We don't quite know what to do. We're either at full cancel, that person's, or we'll just ignore the bad behavior. We haven't done the work, I think, the struggle to figure out, what do we do if we want to keep something of the man or woman and not cancel the whole thing.
Well, I mean, I think you kind of preempted my next question, which was going to be, is there an element of the novel that you struggled the most with, or that you still feel, ambivalent about? What was the hardest part of this story to write?
Sure. So that's actually not hard. Am I being too easy on Moshe? I guess that's my, is because I'm not giving much away. It's done. Any kind of sexual peccadillo for a spiritual leader is virtually unforgivable, in my opinion. And yet here I have this character, and am I being too easy on him? Will people admire him? But then in the back of my mind, I want them to admire his stories. I want them to like his voice, the voice of that storyteller. So yeah, I'd say that's one. The other, I said before, is writing in the voice of a young woman. Am I really allowed to do that? This is the issue also with identity politics, and a lot of fiction writers have to kind of face that. Am I out of my lane? Should I stick to old white rabbis and just tell stories about them because that's me, or can I tell a story from a woman who is offended by what men do? And I don't know. I mean, the reader will ultimately decide whether I pulled that off. In the end, I felt like, look, you can't close yourself off as a novelist. The stories come to you, and you have to tell them the best you can. And that's, to me, that's the end of imagination. If we start to censor ourselves on, is there some story about some group that I can or cannot tell? So that's what I came to. But I think in our culture today, these questions are being asked. Can a non-Mexican write a story that's really a Mexican story? Can a non-African American tell an African American story? I mean, I was a little nervous about that too. Not enough, I think, at all to change the story, but it was something I grappled with.
Gary Steingart was at UCSD when it was several years ago, when he was just starting to write his most recent novel, Lake Success. And I can't remember whether he told me that at some point, in between events, or whether he said it in the formal talk, but he was saying something very similar, because the book is, told half in the voice of an Indian woman and half in the voice of this Jewish man. And he was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but I really want to go there. Like, this is my next step. This is my next challenge to myself as a novelist, to get into someone's head who's different from me, as a woman. Yeah,
he's a fine writer too. I haven't read that book, but I've read many things by him.
It's a very good book. I mean, I enjoyed it. It's, I actually liked it better than his past books.
I'll just repeat again, that's imagination. And if we're going to have writers question the quality of imagination, then our books are going to be much poorer, and our culture will suffer from an extreme poverty. So I'm glad that he, and other writers, will dare. Now, sometimes we won't pull it off, and I think that we should be criticized if that's the case. But to not try, like I said before, is not to expand beyond your narrow identity, I think is a failure as a writer.
So I had one more question that I wanted to ask. Ironically, you just told us that you're not into philosophy, but you've got, this it seemed to me, kind of carefully planted philosopher in the novel that holds one of the keys to understanding it, for me at least, and that's Kierkegaard. You have Yael, who's sitting under a tree as a 13-year-old reading Kierkegaard, and these older kids don't really get what she's, why is she sitting there reading all these books and this philosophy? And even Moshe's like, why Kierkegaard? He's not even Jewish. But he sort of recognizes that she's trying to sort out how to pray, which is of course what Kierkegaard's, I'm assuming she's reading Fear and Trembling, because that's what a teenager would read. But it's this philosophy of fear, right? Kierkegaard's talking about blind faith, which is what Moshe ends up teaching her. But what do we risk by taking that kind of blind faith? and of course, you also have Kierkegaard, who's struggling with his, we all know famously that Kierkegaard ended up leaving his fiancée because he couldn't handle the commitment of true love, and he had to think about it forever. And, that's sort of, there's that subtext as well. I'm wondering if you would say something about that, about whether that is sort of, uh, a key, whether, the role that, that philosophy plays perhaps in sorting out this conundrum of faith that
Yeah,
you're.
thanks. I think I probably wasn't as deep as you're giving me credit for, and it's as smart as what I'd say about Kierkegaard. One thing I was thinking was that so Kierkegaard talks about Abraham as the knight of faith because he's willing to sacrifice his son. So the knight of faith, knight with a K, just the hero of faith, and because you can transcend morality, to really, to delve deep into the presence of the divine. There actually is no right or wrong anymore. And so he admires Abraham because Abraham finds this space above morality. And so as a 13-year-old, Yael's reading that, and that's in Fear and Trembling. And then she comes across Moishe, who in some ways affirms that, because he has music and he has lovely stories, and they're not so much about right or wrong. I mean, they're about inner spiritual battles, and they're about spiritual experience. And then she's kind of sold a little bit. She finds kind of this right synthesis, but then what do you know? He turns out to be a creep. When you live your life in that world that transcends morality, another word for that is that you're a jerk. Like you just do whatever you want, and because you feel like ethics is not. So then later then she has to come to the conclusion that that avenue towards prayer might just be a wrong road entirely, because it leads you away from right and wrong. And I think that's where she's at the end of the book. I mean, I don't want to give that, but she ends up with this heightened ethical awareness, and it's very painful for her. It's not so easy. I mean, what I tried to do for her, I don't think I'm that much of a judgmental person, but I try to write about judgmental people. It can be very painful to be a really judgmental person, because people will let you down. So what happens when people let you down? And so she's struggling with that too. Moshe is not the only mentor in the book. She has other mentors in the book. She has a lot of people disappoint her. So a lot of the inner drama of the book is, what do you do when people disappoint you?
So I think we'll start to gather questions, but I wonder if Rabbi Graubart, you'd like to read another short passage while that's happening.
Yeah.
I have one more bit of reading, and then as you have questions, you can either phrase them in the chat and I will read them for you, or just write, I have a question, or stack in the chat, and I'll call on you and you can ask it yourself.
Okay. All right. So like I said before, so in order not to ruin it for anybody, I'm going to read again another passage from these Camp Tikva interludes. And this is, so Amelia mentioned, there's actually, so Moishe, both in rabbinical school and at camp, has a group of people that he's gathered as kind of a spiritual elite. And in this passage, he decides he wants Yael, who he's seen reading Kierkegaard, to be part of that. So he talks to this slightly older, she's like 16, 17, Tzipi, who later becomes president of the rabbinical school. But a lot of the characters meet at this camp. She's hired by Moishe in camp to gather together this spiritual elite that they come and they sing together and he tells stories to. All right. Moishe suspected, this is from the point, it's not first person, but it's from the point of view of Moishe now, this passage. Moishe suspected that brother director had also sent the laziness that often infected Moishe's soul. And that's why I agreed to hire him. What harm could an old fat man do sitting on the porch playing guitar all day? He couldn't exactly mesmerize these wealthy children with his thoughts on how Binah mated with Chokhmah to produce Tiferet, or teach them to sit quietly and meditate on God's 39 true names, or explain how emanation, revelation, and creation were essentially the same things, the same powers clothed in busks of separate colors. It wasn't kid stuff. It was only when he saw Yael, He learned her name from Tzippi, reading one day from William James, the next day from Kierkegaard, and the following day, God help her, from Heschel himself, that he thought, I wonder if I could talk to her. I wonder if I could teach her something. I wonder if I could do something here. First, he instructed Tzippi to bring her to that evening's front porch concert. Why? Tzippi immediately asked. He squinted at her through the thick lenses of his glasses. The 11 a.m. sun, just emerging from a cloud, produced a kind of halo over Tzippi's head, while the glare obscured the rest of her body. An angel, Moshe wondered? But the cloud moved slightly, and Moshe took in the red tank top, the blue shorts, the bare feet, the eyes, so filled with scheming and petulance. A child, he thought, but then corrected himself. She's 17. Moshe's mother had gotten married at 18. And this Tzippi, his Tzippola, he had to admit she looked less like a child, more like her mother every day. He sighed. Careful, he thought. What was he doing here? Teenagers. They were a separate species. He knew nothing about them. Why Yael? Tzippi asked again. So beautiful. This stunning woman child, perfectly formed, legs, torso, toes, wrists, fingers in perfect aesthetic alignment, proof of the Holy One's beneficence and artistry. And she stood under God's bright sun, his emanating touch in this dazzling green Wisconsin paradise with rolling hills, blue lakes, butterflies, and hummingbirds. God, 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 so beautiful. Of course, there were 2 reddish blotches on her nose, and the even bigger one taking up half her lower chin. Her stringy, unwashed hair. There was the smell of chlorine, inescapable even in the kitchen. The latrines, the less said, the better. The odor of boys everywhere. The yammer and groaning of spoiled children. His aching back, re-injured every night by his ancient mattress. God, so wondrous. New Tzippola, she's not a child of God, like you, like me. I don't have to do everything you tell me. Mom hired me to be your assistant. That doesn't mean you're my master. I'm not your slave. So, New, you do it as a friend. I ask you as a personal favor. Your Holy Mother pays your money. That means nothing to me. For me, you're my Tzippola, my good friend. She tilted her head. Her squinted eyes, her slightly upturned lips, they communicated annoyance and affection at the same time. How does she do that, Moshe wondered? So beautiful. If only she'd wash her hair. I wish you wouldn't call me that, Moshe, she said. Tzippola? I'm not 7, Moshe. My name is Tzipora, and no one likes her. She's sort of creepy, reading by herself all the time. It's not a good idea. She'll keep people away. He stroked his beard. Cliques, he thought. It's not that he wasn't unaware. They existed even among the yeshiva bochers in Yerushalayim. But those social rankings formed around Talmudic prowess, which meant Moshe was always at the top in a category all his own. These rich American kids, the hierarchies were more rigid and harder to follow than the spherotic chart. He could ask Yael himself, but that would probably scare her away. No, he said, you're right, my Tzippola. Sorry, Miss Tzipora. I'm not your master. I'll discuss this with your mother. I'll need a new assistant. But please know my love for you is the purest. It's undying, my sweet holy child. Okay, chill. I'll do it. I wasn't refusing, just giving you advice. She's not, well, look at her. She's not normal. Moshe laughed. His belly laughed. His full-bodied chuckle. It worked for some people. For Tzippi's mother, and sometimes also for Tzippi. She laughed along with him. The Moshe wasn't sure why. Normal, he said? Tzippola, does that seem like the criteria for what I'm doing here? You imagine I'm looking for normal?
Thank you. We have a couple questions that are starting to stack up. So Ray Fink, please.
Thanks, Amelia. Thanks for putting this together. And Rabbi, this is wonderful. I really enjoyed reading your book. So I just want to quickly get to my question. There's another element that I found, which I thought was very interesting, and that is throughout the book, there are parts that relate to the difficulties that institutions have in policing themselves, and the power of big financial donors in terms of influencing decisions, which eventually result in the institution being frozen in its ability to do anything. And of course, you have the kind of the Sheldon Adelson character in the book and a couple of other people. So I was curious about your thoughts on that, not only to the book, but also because I think you included that because you see that this is a problem for many institutions now, especially Me Too movement, et cetera, and how we navigate that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have much to add to that. It's a problem. It's an issue. So first, I'll talk about the influence of donors. I mean, for sure. And in the book, I mean, it's almost boring, and it doesn't go on for very long in the book. But there's the issue of Israel and BDS, and then you have donors on both sides, and then the leaders of the professional leaders of the institution are paralyzed, and they all they can do is kiss up to one donor or another and kind of hope for the best. And that is an issue. We have a culture in Judaism in many of our institutions of big donors, and it ends up being kind of a death spiral, because you give yourself over to that donor, that's those series of donors. Very often it's not very many, 4 or 5, and they call the shots, or you're afraid they call the shots. And yeah, it's an issue. I don't think it's just in Jewish institutions, but it's something, it's a bit of a change in the last 25, 30 years in Jewish institutions. The other issue I tried to navigate a bit in the book too was that it's amazing how huge institutions with lots of legal power and lots of brains and lots of prowess are just, when it comes to maybe even one, Me Too incident, or an identity politics incident or a cancel culture incident, they just handle them so badly. Harvard and Yale and I just read about University of Tennessee. I mean, you just you get 5 people off the street and they'd be able to handle it better, but they just become, and it's not as if most of these things they knew. I mean, people in the administration knew about. I mean, they knew about, let's say, the professor that was behaving badly, the spiritual leader that was behaving badly. They knew that for a lot of these things, it was in the Hollywood producer. They knew, and they weren't prepared for the day when it was all going to blow up. And that kind of shocked me. It's how poor, in some ways, how the wealthier, the more successful an institution is, the worse they're going to handle these kind of scandals. And so in the book, I sort of wonder why that is. What is it? How come? Why haven't we figured this out? And so that's where I don't want to give too much away. But that's also Yael's dilemma. Is like, why? How could you possibly be surprised by this?
Another question from Anna Falkiewicz.
Who's that? No, I'm just kidding.
Hi, thank you again. I'll get to it quickly. So I've read both Rabbis and Gangsters and this, which is not the follow-up, but obviously including Yael, and have thoroughly enjoyed both. And I'm intrigued. So I don't have necessarily a question about this book, because I don't even know where to begin. There's so many layers, and it was amazing. But we've got Yael as really still quite a youngish rabbi still, and so there's obviously lots of different angles where you could take her in her career too, as well as her marriage dilemmas that she's got going on. So really, is there another novel already had started with Yael? Are we? Can I look forward to fall 2021 with another one?
I don't have a novel in my head right now with Yael, and but if there's a demand, like if there's a groundswell of we need another Yael novel, I probably could arrange that. But yeah, I guess we
need another one. Yeah.
I guess I like the character a lot. I hope you like her. Those of you who haven't read, I like her husband a lot too. Also, just this weird, imperfect guy who's struggling to maintain the marriage. It's that theme, that motif sort of flows through both the Yael books.
The relationship between Yael and the husband is really wonderfully illustrated here. Their struggles are so real, and the husband is such a compelling character, right? This musician who's just kind of he's all aesthetics, right. Or all all beauty in that way, right? Sarah Hansen has a question.
Hi. I haven't read the book yet, and I feel like somebody who didn't do her homework. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have even admitted it, right? I will. I kind of wanted you to talk.
Sarah, as long as you bought it, that's, in many ways.
Oh, I have to buy it?
No, it's right.
Yes, that I've done. So I'm just interested, Phil, to see what you didn't have to make this protagonist a woman. Could have made her a man, it would have been easier. And you're talking about pushing yourself and just with imagination. I'm wondering, is that how you started writing novels to begin with? I mean, is there some sort of a theme going on inside yourself in terms of like pushing yourself and pushing your boundaries and making yourself uncomfortable?
Yeah, no. I think when I first started writing fiction, it was just because I just felt like I had to. I mean, a lot of fiction writers, I think, will say that too. I just felt like, that I've got all these stories inside of me. I mean, it's interesting because I hear sometimes, writers have writer's block. I've never had a writer's block. I mean, I've never had like a shortage of ideas. It doesn't mean they're good ideas necessarily, but I've always had ideas. And for me, it was the time, and then there's a point you have to make career decisions. But I felt like, storytelling was, I mean, I'm in fourth grade and fifth grade, like I was writing stories. And the thing is, I was always pretty good at, there's this dictum of writer, write what you know. And I think what I wanted to do with Yael in the first Yael book was I think that I actually wanted to stretch. I felt like I don't want to do the old Jewish man again. It's me, sort of a thinly disguised me. Or, I had this character in a lot of my earlier books named Judah, who was, Judah's actually my great grandfather. And I just, and he was much more like me than, really with Yael, I wanted somebody very, very different than me. I mean, there's now it's still a rabbinical school and she's still a rabbi, so it's not so different, because I still think writing what writing in the environment that is actually just a good practice, at least for me. Otherwise, you have to do research, who's got time to do research? So this way I don't have to do research because I know the environment that Yael operates in. But she's very much not me. Although I will say, as long as I brought it up, somebody once asked me at some dinner, this is with the other book, so who's you in this book? Or a lot of people ask me sort of like, who is this based on? Because it's true, like Ray mentioned Sheldon Adelson, like there's a Sheldon Adelson character, is a Shlomo Carlebach character. So the thing is that I don't want to say yes or no if these characters are based on any real people, but my answer to that is that every character is based on one person, me, right? Because I wrote the book, and every character is in some ways a manifestation of myself. I think with Yael, I was trying to stretch a little bit, these imaginative muscles, and find a part of myself that maybe I haven't examined. But it's still me. I don't know how any fiction writer is writing about anything but themselves, really.
So I wanted to ask about the first passage that you read. This is something that's been kind of, bothering me since I read it, and bothered me again when you read the passage. But I'm just going to ask you because you're here. So he embraces her in a grandfatherly way. It's suggestive, though. I mean, you do leave a little bit open to the imagination of the reader as to whether something did happen when she was 13. And was this? I'm guessing that this suggestion was intentionally unsettling, at least.
Yeah, it was tricky to write. It was. I just what to me what was interesting is both. I mean, how bad is he? Moshe. You have some of that in the Tzipala, she's 17 and, is he allowed to admire her? And it was, but I guess I was more intrigued by Yael's need to hold on to that. And that's when Susan doesn't like it when I use swear words in the novel, but so he's a fucking grandfather. She uses it for emphasis. She doesn't want to give up that this man was my grandfather, and the advice he was giving me was grandfatherly advice, and that's all. And that's very important for her because she just wants to hold on to that. And the book is her fear of losing that, and what's she going to do if it turns out it was all a lie, or it was so sordid that she can't imagine recovering.
I mean, it's quite, this is where it makes this enormous leap, at least for me, between, was this relationship all a lie? But of course, Judaism is also based on faith, right? So the big question is that, is the whole story that we tell ourselves about the existence of God, about everything, is this real? And that's I think that's the fundamental leap of faith, of spirituality that is underlying this whole dilemma of Yael's. But I wanted to ask you something else as well. And Sarah has another question too. So I'll actually, Sarah, go ahead. I'll ask this very quickly, which is
Thanks.
maybe we can even gather the two questions. Is this a call to action in Judaism? I mean, we are at a moment of reckoning in the United States. Across our institutions, we've had a moment of reckoning in various places, in college athletics and the Catholic Church and college campuses, advisor-advisee relationships. Is this a call to action within Judaism, within the rabbinic world? Is the Jewish world in need of reform? And what should be done?
So it's pretty easy to answer for me. I didn't write it as a call to action. It's not a sermon. That's a different side of me that writes sermons. I felt like this was a real situation, and I put characters that I invented in the situation, and was hoping I could make these characters act in ways that were compelling and believable. And that's all I was trying to do. So I think it's interesting to if it's interesting to read, it's because it's an important topic. But it's more important to me that the characters seem real and compelling inside of this compelling topic. And that was the only goal. So in some ways, Amelia and I chatted a bit before, and I said before, my goal is really aesthetic. I'm trying to write a good piece of fiction, a novel that's that I think is worthy. That's not quite true. I mean, I'm sort of stand on those aesthetic standards, so judge it on aesthetic standards. But I guess I'd be lying if I said, like, there's things in the contemporary Jewish world that I think we all should be thinking about more. We should be talking about more. What I don't really have is answers in the book, or Silwan too, the book before that too. I think that also brought up issues about Israel that we should be talking about more. Maybe that we're pushing to the side. But it's not a sermon that's giving us it's not a formula or a program. I think it'd be very difficult to come up with a program from the book. But I think it could lead to some interesting conversation, I think.
Yeah. And I think, the book doesn't give a roadmap in terms of how to deal with these things. In fact, the only roadmap that the book gives is a sort of what not to do.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of what not to do. I'm good at that.
Sarah, did you want to ask your follow-up question?
Yeah, yours was so much better and philosophical. I was curious about the actual writing, and that when you were reading it out loud, and so then, I know what the book's about, and then you read the scene out loud, the first passage. And I was wondering if, when you're writing it, are you specifically writing these sort of double entendres? Like, he's like, oh, dear. It's like, well, my rabbi called me dear, and he wasn't a pedophile. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, it felt a little creepy, but the words weren't creepy. Like, were you very aware of that when you were writing it? Is he praying? Is he protective? Is he loving? Is he, were you aware of that? Or did you just sort of write a scene that was true to you?
I guess it's probably more the latter. I think that, a lot of what I try to do is just get a voice in my head of what a character would sound like, and it's interesting. I mean, a lot of what a writer, I think, does in rewriting is that, by the time you're done with the book, the character better. So then you have to go back, and when you're doing other drafts, you have to rediscover that voice. And that's why, for me, novels take several drafts, 3, 4, 5 drafts, because the voice of the characters, you know them, you get to know them. And then, so I think in some ways, they're about 2/3 through the first draft, I started to know Moshe. And then I tried to kind of reinsert his Yiddishisms and his, deer and nebuchs and gewalt. And, just like, okay, now I get his rhythm. So I think that was really kind of an aesthetic choice too, is trying to really get the rhythm of, this is how this character talks. He was the hardest character to write because, it's interesting. Just from what I read, it's not necessarily the best intro to the novel, because I picked mostly sources with Moshe's voice. Yael's voice is much more dominant in the book, but I couldn't read too many because I didn't want to give stuff away. But that's what I try to do with characters. Try to know them, and then have the dialogue follow how I think they would talk.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Graubart, for being here, for answering these questions. What if you have a little bit of time, we can actually leave the Zoom room open for a couple of minutes just to let people talk a little bit less formally. Unmute yourselves. We don't seem to have any Zoom bombers, so we can just go ahead and do that. But this will be the sort of approximation of the milling around afterwards part. So thank you. Please join me, everyone, in thanking Philip Graubart for this presentation and this book.
Thank you.
And you can,
Some of you came from a long way, so I appreciate that.